It was a bright Friday morning at Ridgeway High School, the kind of day where the air buzzed with excitement for the weekend. For Sarah, a junior, it started like any other. She sat at her desk in math class, the quiet hum of students flipping through their notes and scribbling equations filling the room. The clock above the whiteboard seemed to tick slower than usual, each second dragging on as she longed for the bell to ring. Suddenly, the intercom crackled to life, cutting through the monotony of the lesson. The principal's voice came on, calm but unnervingly firm. "This is a lockdown. I repeat, this is a lockdown. Teachers, secure your classrooms immediately." At first, there was confusion. A few students looked around, wide-eyed, silently mouthing the word lockdown to one another. Drills were rare, and this one wasn't scheduled. The teacher's expression shifted from surprise to urgency as she quickly locked the door and drew the shades over the windows. "Everyone, get to the back of the room. Sit against the wall. Phones on silent," she instructed, her voice steady but strained. Sarah's heart started pounding as she grabbed her phone and shuffled toward the corner with the rest of her classmates. The energy in the room shifted from curiosity to quiet panic as the gravity of the situation sank in. She opened her group chat, and messages were already pouring in. "Is this a drill? Someone said there's a guy in the building. I heard he has a gun." Sarah's hands trembled as she texted her mum, "We're in lockdown. I'm okay. I love you." She stared at her phone, hoping for an immediate reply. Nothing came. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an hour. The classroom was deathly silent, except for the faint hum of the overhead lights and the occasional rustling of someone adjusting their position. A girl next to Sarah was quietly sobbing, her face buried in her hands. The teacher crouched by the door, her eyes locked on the handle, her body tense. Then came the sound that sent a shiver down everyone's spine. A slow, deliberate knock on the classroom door. The knock was calm but deliberate, a sound that instantly froze the room. Sarah held her breath, her pulse pounding so loudly she thought it might give her away. The knock came again, louder this time. The teacher stood up slowly, her face pale, but her expression resolute. She motioned for everyone to stay silent and whispered, "Don't move." "Who is it?" she called out, her voice steady but laced with fear. For a moment, there was no answer. Then, a voice came from the other side of the door. "It's okay. Open up. It's just the police." The words should have been comforting, but something about the tone felt off. Too casual, too rehearsed. The teacher didn't respond. Instead, she pressed her weight against the door and grabbed a chair, wedging it under the handle. The voice came again, this time more insistent. "Open the door. It's safe." Then the handle jiggled. Whoever was on the other side was trying to get in. A wave of silent panic swept through the room. Sarah bit down on her lip to keep from crying out, her eyes darting to the door. Some of her classmates clung to each other, tears streaming down their faces. After a few agonizing moments, the jiggling stopped. The footsteps that followed were slow and heavy, fading down the hall. The classroom remained silent, everyone too afraid to move or even breathe loudly. Then, the intercom crackled again, this time in a panicked tone. "This is not a drill. Stay in your classrooms. Do not open the door for anyone." Sarah's stomach twisted as she tried to process what was happening. This wasn't just a precaution. Something was wrong. The minutes dragged on like hours, each one filled with a tense, suffocating silence. Every sound from outside the room, a creak, a distant thud, felt amplified, sending fresh waves of fear through the students. Eventually, the faint sound of sirens filled the air. Red and blue lights flickered through the small cracks in the window shades, signaling that law enforcement had arrived. Relief swept through the room, but no one dared to move until they were given the all clear. After what felt like an eternity, an officer knocked on the door, identifying himself and explaining that the building had been secured. The teacher cautiously opened the door, and the students were led out in a single file. As Sarah stepped into the hallway, she was struck by the chaos around her. Backpacks and papers were scattered across the floor, chairs overturned, and lockers left ajar. The once familiar space now felt foreign and terrifying. The students were escorted to the parking lot, where parents were waiting anxiously behind barricades. Sarah spotted her mum and ran into her arms, bursting into tears as the weight of the experience hit her all at once. Later, she learned the truth. A man had entered the school through a side door that had been propped open. He wasn't armed, but his intentions were unclear. He had roamed the halls for nearly half an hour before police apprehended him. No one was hurt, but the fear he instilled in everyone that day was unforgettable. For Sarah, the sound of those slow, deliberate knocks on the door would haunt her for years. She couldn't shake the memory of the voice pretending to be a savior or the eerie silence that filled the room. What if the man had been armed? What if the teacher had opened the door? The lockdown changed everything for Sarah. School no longer felt like a safe haven. It felt like a place where safety could shatter in an instant. And though no physical harm came to her or her classmates, the emotional scars left by that day would linger forever. It was a typical gray Tuesday morning at Willow Creek Middle School. The energy in the air was sluggish, with students trudging through the hallways and teachers calling out assignments with little enthusiasm. Jacob, an 8th grader, sat in his second period history class, doodling in the margins of his notebook. The teacher was midway through a lecture on the Civil War when the intercom buzzed to life, interrupting the monotony. "This is a lockdown," came the principal's voice, unusually calm but firm. "Teachers, lock your doors and follow protocol. This is not a drill." The words hung in the air for a moment, sinking in slowly. Jacob looked around at his classmates, confusion and unease spreading across their faces. "Did he say, 'not a drill'?" someone whispered. The teacher, Ms. Callahan, snapped into action, her normally cheerful face now pale and serious. She walked briskly to the door, locked it, and drew the blinds over the windows. "Everyone, move to the back corner," she said, her voice steady but strained. "Phones on silent. Stay quiet and stay down." Jacob grabbed his phone and joined the crowd of students huddled in the corner. His heart was pounding, but he couldn't tell if it was fear or adrenaline. He opened his group chat, and the messages were already flooding in. Someone saw a guy with a gun by the cafeteria. They're saying he's inside the building. The police are on their way. His stomach churned as he typed a quick message to his mum. "We're in lockdown. I'm scared. I love you." He stared at the screen, hoping for an immediate reply, but nothing came. The classroom settled into an uneasy silence. Ms. Callahan crouched by the door, her body tense, as she watched the handle like a hawk. Jacob tried to steady his breathing, but every sound, the creak of the floor, the faint hum of the HVAC system, seemed deafening. He could feel the tension in the room, the collective fear pressing down on everyone. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Some students clutched each other, their faces pale and tear-streaked. Others sat motionless, staring blankly at the floor. Jacob's mind raced with questions. What's happening? Who's out there? Are we safe here? Then, breaking the tense silence, they heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. The sound was faint at first, distant and deliberate, but as the footsteps drew closer, they became louder, heavier, echoing ominously against the tiled floor. The entire class froze, their collective breath caught in their throats. The footsteps stopped just outside their door. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then came the knock. It was soft but deliberate, a slow, rhythmic tapping on the door. Jacob felt a shiver run down his spine. The knock came again, louder this time. Miss Callahan stood, her body rigid as she leaned closer to the door. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice steady but sharp. A voice answered, calm and authoritative. "It's the police. Open up. You're safe now." Relief rippled through the room, but only for a second. Something about the voice felt wrong, too casual, too flat. Ms. Callahan didn't move. She shook her head and whispered, "Stay quiet." The handle jiggled, rattling against the lock. Someone was trying to open the door. A girl near Jacob let out a muffled sob, burying her face in her hands. The handle jiggled again, harder this time, followed by more knocks. "Open the door," the voice demanded, louder and more insistent. Ms. Callahan grabbed a chair and wedged it under the handle, her hands trembling slightly. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911, whispering into the receiver. "We're in room 214. Someone's at the door pretending to be police. Please hurry." The knocking stopped abruptly. The footsteps resumed, this time moving away down the hall. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one dared to move, or even breathe too loudly. Jacob's ears strained for any sound, his mind racing with terrifying possibilities. The intercom crackled again, but this time, the principal's voice was no longer calm. "This is not a drill. Remain in lockdown. Do not open your doors for anyone." The tension in the room reached a breaking point. Some students were quietly crying, while others stared wide-eyed at the teacher for reassurance. Miss Callahan stayed by the door, her body a shield between them and whatever was out there. Then came a loud bang from somewhere down the hallway. It was followed by muffled shouting, the words indistinct but filled with urgency. More bangs echoed through the building, each one louder than the last. Sirens blared in the distance, growing louder until red and blue lights flashed through the slits in the window blinds. Jacob clung to his knees, silently praying for the nightmare to end. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the intercom crackled again. "The lockdown is lifted," the principal announced. "Law enforcement has secured the building." A knock came at the door, but this time it was accompanied by a police officer's voice, calm and clear. "This is the police. You can come out now." Ms. Callahan cautiously opened the door, and officers escorted the students out in single file. The hallway was a chaotic scene. Abandoned backpacks and books littered the floor. A glass trophy case near the cafeteria was shattered, and police tape cordoned off several areas. Later, Jacob learned the full story. A man had entered the school through an unlocked side door. He wasn't armed, but he was carrying a bat and behaving erratically. He had banged on multiple doors, pretending to be law enforcement, before police cornered him near the gym. Thankfully, no one was physically harmed, but the emotional toll was immense. For Jacob, the sound of those footsteps outside the door and the voice pretending to offer safety would haunt him for years. The lockdown had transformed a routine day into a living nightmare, a stark reminder of how quickly normalcy could shatter and how close danger could come. don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Also, click that like button and leave a